Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program we ran on. So I hope everybody has had a good holidays, and now we're into the new year, and hopefully we'll be happy. There's a lot of stuff going on that doesn't bode well, but my resolution is to do all I can to help build a mass party of the left, the independent left. And that should be the Green Party. We got a head start in terms of organization and activity, although I think the way we're organized, we can't pull it off unless we make some changes. But whether it's the Green Party or somebody else, I think that's where we need to be focused on, particularly in the Trump years. I think we can build from below an alternative, a political alternative, by focusing on local elections, local organizing, and build up from there and come out of the Trump years with thousands of locally elected officials, some people in state houses, and maybe some people by then or soon in the House of Representatives, where we can have leverage on national policy. We're not going to do that without building a base. So I spent the last week trying to write an article for New Politics. It was going to be about independent political action in the second Trump administration. But I got sidetracked and I spent a week diving deeply into what happened in the 2024 election, because I wanted to explain a paradox. Public opinion polls show that the American public leans progressive pretty strongly, but it elected a plutocratic, racist, America First jingoist for president. So how did that happen? And I never did get in this article to the case for independent political action under Trump. That's going to have to be another article, because by the time I addressed this paradox and did a lot of presentation of the data and documentation, I had 7,500 words, which was more than New Politics asked for. So what I found looking into this paradox is, and at the election results and the exit polls and other polls, were basically three conclusions I drew from this about this paradox. The first is, and this is not so surprising, the economy was the top issue for the voters. A lot of people have noted that. Trump focused on it and Harris did not. And as a consequence, Harris lost votes that Biden won in 2020, a lot of votes, mostly among people of color whose central issue was economic difficulties, although it was the central issue for pretty much everybody across the board. So the second thing, which was more surprising to me, is that people of color were the swing vote by far. 7 million Black and Latino voters, 3.5 million of each group, who voted for Biden in 2020 did not vote for Harris or Trump. Most of them stayed home. A few may have voted third party, but that was the difference in the election. Trump's vote grew a little bit, but Harris's vote went way down from Biden's. And a lot of people then say, and this is a conventional media narrative, that the white working class is Trump's base, and that's what got him elected. No, you look at the data, Trump's base is white voters of all classes. It's a cross-class white supremacist bloc that the Republican Party has built since the white backlash to civil rights began in the 1960s. And actually, it's not growing. It's actually receding a little bit. Among white working class voters, the percentage that Trump got has not changed since 2016. It was the same in 2020, the same in 2024. So his base in the white working class is not growing. Trump's white vote as a whole increased by 1.1 million, but Harris's white vote increased by 2.7 million compared to what Biden got in 2020. So the difference was people of color. Trump did gain 2 million votes of people of color that he did not get in 2020, but Harris lost 8.9 million votes of people of color compared to 2020. And as I said, their top concern were the economic issues, and Harris gave them no hope with new policies that might improve their conditions. This was a change election. People wanted change, particularly with regard to economic issues. And Trump posed as the outsider change candidate. It's kind of preposterous when you look at the details, but he had slogans like Trump will fix it. And he didn't explain how, but he just said he would. And people said, well, I'm not happy with the status quo. Maybe we go with this. And Harris posed as a candidate of stability in the status quo. We're not going back was one of her slogans, which implied no change from the Biden administration that people concerned about the economy were concerned about. So economics were the top issue. People of color were the swing vote. And then the third thing, this is explaining that paradox, is that the American public supports progressive economic, social, and international policies by strong majorities. And I will list some of that polling in a minute. But the optimistic yet challenging conclusion for us to draw is that there's a huge political vacuum to be filled on the progressive left. And the article I was writing was then going to explain how we could do that and argue that it had to be an independent party of the left, not getting the Democrats to come out with some kind of populist progressive program that they are structurally, congenitally, it's not in their DNA going to do because they're funded by the corporate power structure and their professional cadre are upper middle class people who, like the very rich, not interested in redistributive economic policies. They may be more socially liberal than the Republicans, who also don't want progressive populist economic policies, but they're not progressive on economic issues. That's the Democratic Party, and it's not going to change given, who they are. So with the article already at 7,500 words, in the case for independent political action is going to be my next article. But going to the polling, showing there's a base for a progressive independent party. On economic and class issues, the polling shows that strong majorities of Americans support social democratic type policies for more economic security and fairness. 62% want a job guarantee. 62% want a minimum income guarantee. 60% want Medicare for all. 65% want a Green New Deal. 68% want rent control. And 63% want more public housing. 86% want to raise the minimum wage. 64% want that to be at least $17 an hour. 73% want universal free childcare, a public childcare program. 57% support tuition-free public college. 78% want to increase Social Security benefits. 79% want to tax the rich and the big corporations. 70% approve of labor unions. So, there's a strong base there for a social democratic type reform program. And then on cultural issues, it shows that the people are not on the Republican side of the culture wars. Shows strong majorities supporting anti-discrimination, equal rights, and pro-democracy reforms that will protect social and political minorities. 53% want a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. 63% want abortion to be legal in all or most cases. 70% support same-sex marriage to be legal. 74% want transgender people treated with respect. 63% want to abolish the electoral college. 61% support ranked choice voting. So, there may be a culture war going on, but the Republican side is the minority with the American public. And then on international questions, the foreign and military policy of the United States, public opinion is a little bit more complicated from a progressive point of view. 77% hold a progressive internationalist view that, quote, America has a moral obligation to stand up for human rights and democracy around the world. And polls indicate that a majority take a pro-human rights position on the two biggest contemporary wars the U.S. is involved in. It shows that support grew for an arms embargo of Israel from 52% in late October 2023, when the Gaza war started, to 61% in early June. I couldn't find any more recent polling, but that's a majority position. And then 61% of Americans still support Ukraine, providing it with military aid to defend itself against Russia's invasion, although that support is sharply divided along partisan lines. 89% of Democrats support that aid, as do 64% of independents, but only 32% of Republicans do. Now, where public opinion departs from the progressive position is in its strong support for high military spending. 67%, this is a lot, agree with the statement, quote, America must remain the world's greatest military power, no matter the cost. And then 51% support increased military spending, 23% support the current high level of military spending, and only 14% want to reduce it. Now, from a progressive point of view, it's understandable that progressive-minded people may want to keep military spending high because of the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, rising tensions over China and Taiwan on the Korean Peninsula, and worries about the vulnerability of the U.S. to terrorism affecting our physical and digital infrastructure, as well as, innocent people. We're subject not only to physical attack, but cyber attack. So it's not surprising that progressive-minded people, or a lot of them, do support high military spending. In fact, another poll showed 65% of Americans are really worried. They expect the U.S. to be involved in a war in the next 5 years. And I think they're probably thinking of the Middle East or over Taiwan, or maybe even getting directly involved in Ukraine, although nobody's proposing that. In any case, they're worried. But it's also clear from polling on these international questions that strong majorities, overwhelming majorities of Americans do not support the use of military force other than for defensive purposes. So only 4% believe that military force should be used to defend human rights, and only 1% to promote democracy abroad. The American people don't want to go into other countries and do regime change to allegedly improve their human rights and democracy situations. In fact, when Americans say, well, how are you going to promote democracy? The top ways people say we can do that is by setting a good example here at home. That's 52% of the American public. Working through international organizations like the United Nations, that's 28%, and 8% say foreign aid. That is the way most people want to promote democracy and human rights, not using the military. So that's a progressive position. So I think, there's a challenge for progressives to explain that we can do those things without astronomically high military spending. It's not necessary for U.S. defense or for promoting the foreign policy values that majorities support. That is, promoting peace, human rights, and democracy. So I think we need to speak. I've used the slogan, I got it from Ralph Nader. We need to talk about the U.S. being more secure as the world's humanitarian superpower, making friends instead of enemies, instead of the world's military superpower intervening with military force around the world. So I think progressives can make a good case for reduced military spending, but we're going to have to persuade some people. So that's, what I've got in this article so far. So let me now preview what I'll be writing in this upcoming article on independent political action under Trump. And the first thing I want to say is that the Democrats will not and cannot fill that huge vacuum on the progressive left. They're wealthy funders, they're professional cadre who control the Democratic Party. They're just not going to support redistributive, social democratic type reforms. It's just not in their DNA. The Harris campaign reflected this. This has been the Democratic policy of neoliberalism since Carter. Arguably, it began under Johnson when he substituted subsidies for private developers to build affordable housing instead of building more public housing. So that's been in the Democrats. They're no longer the New Deal Democrats. That ended a long time ago. So the Democrats aren't going to fill this political vacuum. And then how are we going to do it? Well, I would argue, and this is the most important point, we got to build it from the bottom up. And I'm talking here about the Green Party. The Green Party will have to reform itself to carry out the approach I'm about to outline. And if the Green Party doesn't do it, another group that wants to do it, although, is going to have to do it. Although I don't know of anybody, prepared to do that. I mean, most of the, progressive nonprofits and the socialist groups are involved in movement activity. The progressive nonprofits then defer to the Democrats. And even the socialist groups, most of them like DSA do. So I don't know where it's going to come from. I think it's probably going to have to come from the Green Party. But when I say build from the bottom up, and doing that right now, I mean, we got to build a base if we're going to have a nationally influential party. But during the Trump years especially, we should be focused on building local parties. And we should focus on electing not just hundreds like the Greens have, but thousands to local office. There are 500,000 local elected offices in this country. There are plenty of opportunities. And then on that foundation, we can begin electing people to state houses and eventually the U.S. House. And hopefully that's not too far off. And when we get a caucus in the House, the left will begin to have the power, leverage, and influence to really affect national policy. Our presidential campaigns are fine, but they're really on the margins of the debate. And given the problem, the spoiler problem and lesser evil voting, it's really not, I think, where we can build power to influence national policy. So, first point is the Democrats not going to do it. Second, we need to build from the bottom up. Third, we need to build a movement party. We should be as active in labor and social movements as we are in elections. In fact, our movement activity will raise our profile and credibility with the public, which will pay off in elections. Fourth, we should be an organizing party. We're talking about organizing, not just mobilizing. We should not only be mobilizing the usual suspects, the people we already have with us. We should be reaching out to organize those who are not already with us. And that means we need to systematically reach out. We need to have an organizing plan, like community organizing or union organizing. In particular, we should be engaged in community organizing. It's called deep canvassing. In the labor movement, it's called relational organizing. And that means talking to people on doorsteps, by phone, at work, tabling in public places. And when we talk to people, we listen to their concerns more than we preach about our views. And we do that to build relationships with people. And once we have trusting relationships, then we can talk about politics and recruiting people to the party. And we should maintain those relationships. It's not one-off. You've got to have regular communications with the people you're organizing, newsletters and follow-up contacts for more discussion. And every local party should have a systematic outreach plan to the communities they want to organize, which means we should have a plan. My fifth point, we need to prioritize who we're going to organize. We're not going to go to the business owners as the Green Party and say, we're going to organize you first. We're probably going to go to communities where we're already getting, good response when we run candidates or we get people from and strengthen the organizing there. And then look at, what other communities can we reach? And what communities should we reach? For example, the people that vote in low numbers, who tend to be working class, people of color, and young. And so there are priorities to organize because they're not voting for the Democrats or the Republicans. And we're talking now, okay, so we have a plan and we're organizing. And the point is, we want to get power. We're not here just to speak truth to power, but to get power to act on the truth. And so we need to ask ourselves, which elections can we first win office to get a foothold in local government? And then which districts are next most likely that we can organize? And as we gain a foothold in local government, which local districts for state legislatures or even House seats are we capable of targeting, running competitive elections and eventually winning? And then we need to not just let anybody, at random who says, I want to run for this office, get our support. Nominations should come out of a collective process of the members linked to our strategy. So we got to organized plan, not just a random bunch of people deciding here and there to run for office. And my sixth point is we should be a dues-paying membership party, mass membership party. We should be a party of committed people who support the party. If people are not willing to pay dues, they are not committed. I mean, let's be honest. And they shouldn't have voting rights in party affairs. We need a party of people who are serious and are going to participate. Now, we could, I think $15 a month would be a good standard. That's what DSA uses. That's their standard dues, and they have tens of thousands of members. So I think that's doable. And you can have, other categories for low income, hardship, another category for people that want to give more and be a sustainer. But at least $15 a month should be expected. And an independent party doesn't expect members to support it financially with regular contributions is not serious. I mean, we're taking on the two most capitalist parties in history. Not Howard Phillips, famous writer, I'm forgetting his name. He said in a book, maybe 20 years ago, that the Democrats are the world's second most enthusiastic capitalist party. So we got the two most powerful capitalist parties in the world that have billions of dollars. And if we can't just, raise, a few $1 million to sustain the party organization, what are we doing? We're wasting our time. So what the Green Party or any party on the left that wants to build a mass party needs to do is stop being a memberless party like the Democrats and Republicans, without living, breathing members who can be represented at the higher councils of the party in proportion to the membership at the base. You're not going to have democracy. Memberless parties are run by informal elites. And without grassroots party organization, primaries become plebiscites, not participatory democracies, because ordinary voters who identify with the Green Party by registering with it with the state, if that's not possible, if you have a primary, picking up the green ballot at the primary, or in many cases, just voting for Green candidates on the general election ballot, who on their own petition to be on the ballot. Ordinary voters don't have a say. They vote among pre-selected choices that party insiders and elites have selected for them. That's not the kind of democratic, grassroots, participatory democracy that we need, because this is going to take lots of people developed as smart activists. And we need to be smart, and we need to have a lot of people involved. And without that kind of insistence on serious members and a structure where they can really participate, we're just not going to get the job done. My seventh point is, during the Trump years, we need to take advantage of the federal nature of American government. Municipalities and states have substantial authority and autonomy on policy, more than in most other countries. And we should use that to resist the Trump agenda. We have a great historical example, and that is the resistance of many northern communities and states to the Fugitive Slave Act in the 1850s. And now we're about to have mass deportation of immigrants under Trump. But we have, sanctuary cities and having local police and sheriff's departments not cooperate with ICE. That's the kind of resistance we can build and use the authority and autonomy we have at the local level and at the state level to resist Trump's reactionary policies. So we should focus on influencing local and state policies and electing Greens during the second Trump administration, not only to resist those policies, but to advance our own progressive economic, social, and environmental policies as alternatives to the Democrats' corporate neoliberalism and the Republicans' corporate neo-fascism. We can do this. We can win reforms at the local level, which, set an example and create a basis for then moving on to the state and national level. And the eighth point I'll make about this building a independent political action during the Trump years is that we need to be non-sectarian. It's got to be, at this point, a broadly progressive party with a social democratic reformist program in which radical socialists are current. Americans are ready to fight for these social democratic reforms of capitalism, like Medicare for all, free childcare, tuition-free public college, promoting renewable energy. but they're not ready to fight for socialism to the extent they even understand it. And that is, social ownership and democratic planning and administration of the major means of production and distribution. That hasn't even been discussed. We need a socialist movement. So I would argue the role of a socialist current within this broader independent progressive party should be educational. It should be explaining to people in the party and to the public how capitalism exploits and steals from working people, how capitalism's dynamic built into the system of endless growth is destroying the environment. And then when we get to particular policies, we need real solutions, which are socialist solutions, like the National Health Service instead of just National Health Insurance or Medicare for All. I talked about that in my campaign because of the corporatization, not just of the health insurance part of the healthcare system, but of the whole system. Private equity has bought up the hospitals, practices, all the ancillary processes, or its other corporations, pharmacies, funeral homes, elder care places, you name it, ambulance companies. It's all run for profit, not based on people's needs. So we need a National Health Service where the whole healthcare system is publicly owned and democratically controlled. Another example is we need an eco-socialist Green New Deal. We can't just be putting out tax breaks and incentives for private corporations and consumers. That's not going to do it. We need public ownership in key sectors to plan a complicated, rapid transition to zero greenhouse gas emissions and 100% clean energy. Now, those are social solutions. This is not socializing the whole system, but that's the kind of thing the socialist movement can play an educational role when we talk about policy. And I think another important point the socialist movement needs to make is that the capitalist power structure will just not accept social democratic reforms. Even if we're able to get some of them passed, they will resist them and seek to repeal them. And we're going through a process like this for the last 50 years. So that's why we need the full political and economic democracy of socialism to have the democratic power taken away, or the power taken away from a capitalist elite and placed in the hands of all the people. So these are the kinds of educational concepts that I think a socialist current in this broader progressive party should play. And it would be a stupid mistake for socialists to focus on, capturing the leadership positions in the mass party. They're just going to capture themselves. If they're going to say, well, we're going to change the program from these progressive reforms leading to socialism, and they'll end up capturing themselves. The role of socialists is to create more socialists within the movement, within the party, and then, getting to that socialist transition, and consciousness will take care of itself. It's not going to be imposed from the top down by capturing the leadership. It has to be an educational process. So, And then the other part of this sectarian problem is that it leads to faction fights, when people are trying to grab power. And most people join movements and parties to learn and to take action, not to fight people. And so those faction fights just push a lot of people away. And then the other, I think, sectarian mistake we got to avoid is focusing most of our criticism and energy at the people closest to us politically. And we saw this during the 2024 presidential election. AOC, a progressive Democrat, attacks Jill Stein with a bunch of baseless assertions that she knew were false, like the Greens never run local candidates. And we got pictures of her, with leaflets for a Green candidate in New York City the year before she ran for Congress. So she was lying, but she attacked Jill Stein. And then Stein's response, there's the picture. So, yeah. So Stein's response was to focus more of her social media, which is most of the media I saw that she did, on barbs that, sarcastic comments about AOC, rather than at Harris and especially Trump. And most progressive-minded people are repelled by this stuff. They want to know what you stand for, what you're going to do, not what's wrong with somebody else, particularly someone who's not that far away from you politically compared to the other options like Harris and Trump. So I think that's a mistake. And both sides, like we should be telling progressive Democrats, you want the independent left to be strong because that gives you more leverage when you're fighting the corporate Democrats. And on the other side, for us, when it's not an election and we're pushing for a single payer healthcare system, we can do that in coalition with progressive Democrats. And instead of, alienating them before we get to that point. So we should approach progressive Democrats as potential Greens, not as sellouts or our biggest political threat. That's a sectarian mistake. I think we make too much, and progressive Democrats do as well. They spend more time attacking us than they do Trump. It's a big problem on the left, and I would say, all of us in this independent progressive party, in particular the socialists, have to guard against that and caution against that and try to prevent that from happening. In fact, we have to realize that if the independent left party is going to get a mass base, a lot of them are going to be people who now consider themselves progressive Democrats. They're going to decide this independent left party is a better option for them than staying in the Democratic Party, which is run by the corporate Democrats. And then, so that's basically the argument that's a preview of my article that I'm going to write on independent political action in the second Trump administration. We need to build that independent political base from the bottom up, especially in the Trump years, and then aim to be winning House seats and real national influence as we come out of the Trump years. So I'm going to get that article written up in the next few days and get it somewhere. I haven't decided who to submit it to. I had one in New Politics, but they come out twice a year. I guess I could put it on their website, but I may try for a broader distribution website. So anyway, I'm sure people have some thoughts on what I just said or what's in the news. Chris is suggesting I give it to New Green Horizons. I think certainly that should be one of the outlets, if not the first one. I'm thinking of Counterpunch, which has much broader distribution at this point, but we'll see. In any case, let's see what you guys think. George Johnson Hamilton. Is Green Party only political, or are there social and community benefits that come along with volunteering as a community organizer? It depends on what your local party is doing, if there is a local party. I think most Greens give lip service to being active in the movements as well as in elections. But I see very few Green parties at the local level actually, doing the outside or the outreach that community organizations do with traditional community organizing techniques, like canvassing. So I think you got to look at your local situation and, hopefully if it's being done, get involved, volunteer. If it's not, suggest that it be done and try to get it going. Scout Trooper 164. I think if the Greens want to get more members and stuff, we either need to focus on a mix of minor and major problems, as well as take the fear out of the word socialist. That fear is loud. Yeah, and on the other hand, more and more people identify positively with it, particularly since about 2011, when one poll showed a lot of young people viewed it positively. So I think we need to educate about it, and that will reduce the fear. But on the other hand, I don't think when we're out there campaigning for a particular reform, like solution, say public housing to provide more affordable housing. We're in a terrible housing crisis right now. Homelessness is skyrocketing. People are losing their homes. People will respond to that on its own terms. And then, stamping it as socialist, I think is sort of a second level of the discussion. It's not your leading slogan, but if people call it that, then you can say, well, yeah, it's a socialist solution, and here's why it works better than the private solution of public subsidies for private developers. So I think we need to, treat it as not something shocking but also not label ourselves that, or at least label this independent progressive party as a whole, have it lead with that label. I think people are ready to mobilize for socialism. They are ready to mobilize for guaranteed jobs, a guaranteed minimum income, affordable housing, affordable health care, and so forth. And that's the way we can mobilize and recruit people and organize them into an independent party of the left. Joanna Munley, in your experience, do you know what states or areas of the U.S. will respond to socialist or green ideas? Well, I think generally it's in the precincts that are around universities where the word socialism is not so scary for a lot of people, more on the coast than in the center of the country. Green is more positive. For most people, it just means environmental, which is a very positive thing. For people more familiar with the Green Party and knowing that it's got a social and democratic and peace agenda, then it's controversial with some folks who are not progressive. And there are a lot of people in America like that. I mean, we have to understand. I talked about the white supremacist base of the Republican Party. We had a political realignment beginning in the 1960s where the people that believed in white supremacy went to the Republican Party. They didn't want racial equality or competition from below, from people of color, for jobs and college educations and favored status. And so they've congregated in the Republican Party, but that base, I think, has shrunk since the 1960s. In 1968, the combined vote for Wallace and Nixon ran on the Southern strategy, a dog whistle racist campaign. Wallace ran on states' rights, more explicitly racist campaign. They came up among working class voters, by one statistic I saw when I did this research, was 64% of the vote in 1968. Trump is maxed out at 49.9% in this election, which is, from what I could tell, it reflects the class structure of the United States. He's got a lot of billionaires, like he's got about 30 billionaires in his corner now. I saw one estimate this morning that it said about 2/5 of the big capitalists are behind Trump as opposed to the Democrats. So there's a fraction of the capitalist class is moving to the hard right. And another fraction, which is more liberal in terms of social policy and is not going that way. And in the middle class and the working class, as far as I could tell, you can use indicators of class like income and education. And there's not much difference of the percentage that vote for Trump, whether they're working class by those indicators or middle class by those indicators. The upper class is so small by, as a portion of the population, plus from what we can tell from these polls, that you can't even tell. But, I did mention that one 60-40 split that one author estimated. So anyway, and so what areas of the country or states? I think there are two kinds of states where these progressive ideas have a better foothold. That is in the more cosmopolitan coastal states. And of course, university areas. But also there's some states with, kind of an independent streak. Maine is one of those. Alaska is one of those. And in the western states, really from the Rockies going west, more people there identify as small I independents than as Democrats or Republicans. Now, they aren't all, with the Greens, but a portion of them are. So that's what I understand about where people are more receptive to our ideas. But then I'll say in another context, and that's along the racial divides. Black people, first of all, and then Latinos, Asians, and other people of color are more open to these ideas than white people are generally. And plus, a lot of those people, particularly Black and Latino people, don't vote. Not so much, I think, because they're apathetic, but because they're alienated. And they don't have any trust that their vote is going to make a difference or that the people running are going to, really care about them. So I think, those sections in places like the South and the Southwest are communities in which we can find a good response to socialist or green ideas. So I think, it's a process of evaluation and research that every local party should undertake and see in their community, their metro area, which communities will be most receptive. And that's who you start organizing with, and you begin building a base. And then you move out to the next most, potentially receptive communities and expand the base. And, as we are in local office and as we're active on these issues in the public, view in social movements and in unions, then more people, take us seriously, which is a big problem in getting support. And we're seen as more credible because we're in office and we're doing stuff. So I think, anywhere you are, you can find people who are receptive, and you start with them and build out from there. Chris Blankenhorn, if we can learn the message properly, rural Americans have been abandoned by the Democrats. Things are not good economically for rural Americans. They face many of the same issues as the urban working class, but manifested differently. Agriculture has been corporatized, and they are seeing the direct impact of industrialized ag and climate chaos. If we can learn to adapt, the Green Platform is very palatable to rural voters if presented right. I completely agree, and it's a political vacuum that the Democrats are not going to fill, and the Republicans have filled with their, punching down at scapegoats who they blame for problems those people they target had nothing to do with. The problems you name in agriculture and industrialized ag, and also manufacturing leaving these small towns and rural areas. Also lower voter needs. I'm not sure what you mean. But those are issues that the Republicans don't have answers to. They just have scapegoats to blame, and they mobilize people around that. And the Democrats, they're just not interested, not doing much. They've just written off these districts, which now tend to be Republican, as not a good, way to spend their energy and time. But if we build a party from below in a rural area, you're going to find support, and you can organize with those people and build out from there. And I think, Chris's main point is right, that the Greens program can be messaged and presented to rural voters in a way that they will find attractive. We don't need 1 million votes to need. If we need 100, we can knock on all those doors, even with a small team. In a local election, yeah. Vicky Corden, Trump talking about mass deportations and revoking U.S. citizenship from naturalized citizens. Any thoughts? This is going to be a big fight, and this is where we can play a powerful role in organizing our municipalities and our states to not cooperate with Trump on these things. Just like, many northern communities and states didn't cooperate with the Fugitive Slave Act and made it hard to implement. And it actually led to the Civil War and the first Reconstruction, really the Second American Revolution, that expanded the franchise to Black people and gave them formal equality. There was a counter-revolution in the latter half of the 19th century that imposed Jim Crow, but all that, what I'm saying is the resistance to the Fugitive Slave Act led to a process that ended up with the abolition of slavery and the enfranchisement, at least on paper, of Black people. So we need to look at our resistance to the, scapegoating of immigrants and Trump trying to mass deport them, and doing stupid things like revoking U.S. citizenship from naturalized citizens. That's going to take a constitutional amendment. I think there's more, rhetoric from Trump than a real policy. But the mass deportations, he's got the people in place that want to do that, like Steve Miller and this Holman guy from ICE. They are, they're the kind of people Hitler would have hired to round up the Jews. It's really a dangerous situation. But it's an issue that we need, as Greens, need to be very involved in, and it's something we can do at the local level. As I said, get our cities and our sheriff's departments and our police departments not to cooperate with deportation, like when they detain an undocumented immigrant on some offense. Usually they're minor. The most common one is driving without a driver's license because they can't get them. Get our local law enforcement to say we're not going to hold people so ICE can come and get them. If they are to be released on their own recognizance, they're going. If they're waiting for their what happens when you're indicted, you have a hearing before a judge. I'm forgetting the word, but you're in jail overnight, then you go before the judge and they tell you the crime you're charged with and how you give a plea. At that point, most people are let go on their own recognizance or with bail. We should not have local law enforcement holding these people because ICE wants to come and get them. That's a federal law. Let the feds do that and come into our communities. And then, of course, we can organize nonviolent resistance to when ICE shows up, demonstrations. If ICE has an office in your community, hector the hell out of it with protests. I mean, there are lots of things we can do. And that's one thing I think where the Greens can distinguish themselves by doing that. The one thing the Greens have that any other organization working on any of these issues doesn't have is that not only are we telling the authorities in power what we want, we're running people to take the power and get elected. And that makes us unique, and it should be a real selling point in recruiting people from the social movements to the Green Party. So that's another thing I hope people keep in mind. That's selling point. Janielle, when door-to-door canvassing, it's older people we're talking to, at least in my local precinct. They're afraid of the word socialist. Yeah, but older people talk to their younger people in their families. So now the word socialist, don't preach, listen. Ask them, what issues concern them? What issues, would they wish somebody was working on? What are the problems? And listen. And you'll find out what the issues are for people. And then you can, give them briefly, what the Green Party is trying to do about it. But like I said before, we don't, go to people with the first word out of our mouth, socialism. First word out of our mouth should be, here's a practical solution, a real solution to this problem. Like healthcare, we got to take it out of the hands of the corporations and make it a public service like public schools. And when you phrase it that way, the polling shows majority of Republicans agree with it. So I think, like I said, spend more time listening than preaching. And, you don't need to talk about socialism. If they bring it up, you can try to say, well, it just means, democracy in the economy as well as politics, and explain, how that would work. And, then they're going to say, what about the Soviet Union or China? And you can say, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about democratic socialism. Scout Trooper 164, I think we need to pay close attention to what Trump says. He will say one thing and then do something else the next. This is going to be tough, but possible, reading between the lines. I think we got to react to both. What he says, a lot of times is stupid, wrong, and, that needs to be pointed out. But what he does, we got to react to, because that's, in the end, what really counts the most. So, trying to read between the lines, like, what's he going to do about Ukraine? He could do everything from completely cutting Ukraine off and given, supporting Putin in his maximum demands, which is to take all of Ukraine, or at least the parts he's claimed, to finding Putin really doesn't want to negotiate and getting mad and then arming Ukraine to the teeth. I mean, you could see Trump doing either of those things, especially given some of the people he has appointed to advise him on Ukraine. They run the spectrum of those two positions. So I'm not going to predict. I'm going to react to what actually happens in that case. Scout Trooper 164, Howie, I asked last week, but what do you feel about folks claiming Gen Z is losing jobs for being lazy, when evidence appears they want work-life balance? Yeah, I mean, everybody gets called lazy. Older people call younger people lazy. White people call black people lazy. Black people call some white people lazy. I mean, it's kind of a way of dismissing another group. But, if Gen Z people are saying they don't want to work endless hours and want, to do some other things with their life, I think we should affirm that. And then try to bring that into the labor movement and say, we need, reduce working hours with no loss in pay. And then take that out of corporate profits by a tax system. So there was a proposal that circulated in the Greens in the 80s and 90s. It came out of France by a guy named Andre Gortz in particular, but others, who said there should be a general tax and then you pay people a second income that covers the difference between their shorter working hours and what they would have made working 40. But instead of it coming out of companies, which are at various levels of profitability, you take it out of the social productivity gains of the whole economy. It's an idea that makes sense to me, and it's how you could implement 40 hours work, or 30 hours work for 40 hours pay. I think it would work better than making that demand on a particular corporation, because some corporations could afford it, but others couldn't. Or, one corporation maybe could get forced into doing it, but it would make it less competitive and hurt its standing in the market against other corporations in the same industry. So I think it being a social program is the way to implement that program. But that's the kind of thing that, Gen Z people who are looking for that could get behind. That's an old demand from the 30s on the left that gets discussed somewhat these days, but it's not been a demand of any parties with any mass support. You can find little sectarian socialist groups that have raised it, but they're not really doing anything more than talking. And so anyway, I think the work-life balance. The Greens had a slogan in their first economic program, which was pretty radical, in about 1984 or 5, where they said they want a fair distribution of work and free time, I think is the way it went. So that you don't have unemployment for some people and other people getting overworked. I think that's the way the slogan went, but that was the idea. And so the Greens, internationally have been talking about this idea since we got started in the early 80s, or 1979 in the case of Germany. Vicki Corden, another concern I have, it is about the renaissance of militias such as Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and the like under the Trump administration. Yes, and there are state laws against private militias that are not well enforced. So here's another case where, building from the bottom up, we can begin to act on this when Trump isn't at the state level. So I'm concerned about it too. You don't know whether Trump's going to turn them loose, particularly in the context of mass deportations, or protests, or counter protests and counter revolutionary activity against people who are out there protesting in solidarity with Palestine, for example. That could be another area where this is a problem. Or inevitably, there's going to be some police brutality incident that's going to bring people out into the streets again, like they did for George Floyd. And the far right is going to look at that as an opportunity for violence. So there are a lot of cases here. But these militias are not supposed to exist. You're not supposed to have private military organizations. It's against state law in almost every state. So I think that's the way to, try to put a check on these people. Some of whom are just looking for an excuse to get violent. That's what they've been doing their little training in the woods about. Scout Trooper 164, I think we need to pay close attention to what Trump says. He will say, well, we already answered this one. George Johnson Hamilton, how about fees, late fees and compounding interest creating endless debt? This seems to be a simple and important capitalist failure that we should educate about. Yeah, and not just that we want the banks and these, companies like the phone companies and the, cable news or cable companies and, everybody that's charging these fees. Not just regulating them, but having institutions that we control. Like instead of banks, credit unions, where, we're members and we elect the board and we can help determine the policies. Public banks, same thing. Why is the cable news and internet in private hands when they are basically, at least when you come to the cables, the files, you don't have every company putting their own cord down. You have cord put down or cable put down, and then it becomes a conduit for everybody using it. So those are natural cases. Natural monopolies are where we naturally should have public ownership. And that's not very controversial, even with people that are pro-capitalist generally, because their argument is, well, if you can't have a market that keeps prices down and consumer choice is supposed to, keep things like fees and high interest down, then you need public ownership. But I would say, we should be putting public alternatives out there as a solution to those two issues. And we used to have much more regulation of interest rates in the banking sector until really the Carter years. And during the New Deal, from the New Deal on, that New Deal era from about 1935 to 1975, we did have that regulation and it worked well. So that's another thing to point out in this context. And this is a kind of issue, it's a consumer issue that has wide appeal. It's the kind of thing, Greens can talk about and offer solutions, and it speaks to things people feel. Scout Trooper, yep, I answered this one. Oh, no, you didn't. Or no, I didn't. I know I asked this last week as well, but what do you feel about the way corporations are using AI? As someone who wants to be a writer, I fear how this will handle VAs, writers, artists, and more. Trace Search, a video game developer, for instance, is using AI to create artwork despite making billions of dollars in video games, like they did with Call of Duty, Black Ops 6. And since regulation aren't handled well, I fear VAs will be replaced after companies get a copy of their voice. Okay, VAs, I guess, means voice actors. Yeah. So, yeah, AI, man, that is a big question. And I think it's going to need to be regulated. I'm not prepared to say, exactly what regulations there are. I think the first thing is we need to protect voice actors and people like that who Uh, Artificial intelligence will take a likeness of and use in contexts or in ways that the person has not authorized, and profit off that person's likeness, picture or uh, voice or whatever. So there are regulations. I know it's being discussed. It's an issue I'm not well versed in, although I know enough to recognize it is a big problem coming up. I was going to say on the horizon, but I think it's hit us already.
I'm more well versed in it.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the underlying thing that we got to remember when we talk about AI is that it's a tool, right? And the biggest problem with it is who's controlling that tool, right? It's being controlled by the capitalists. They've scraped the entirety of the internet, right, to turn our content into the fuel for these AI things. But so because of who's controlling that tool, it's not going to be liberatory, right? It's not going to provide us with leisure time. It's not going to be it's not going to be used to lower our working hours and things like that. It's going to be used to cut us out. But I do think it's important that we remember that, right? That this is just the tool. It's not, and the core problem is who's controlling it. One piece of hopefulness I have directly related to what Scout was talking about in terms of AI being used in the video game industry. The video game industry is not unionized, really at all. There's some pushes for it, here and there, but it's not a unionized space. But we just saw the unionized screen actors and writers succeed in big national strikes, and AI was key to those things, right? So the screen actors and the Actors Guild, or the Screen Actors and the Writers Guilds, they made it a big point in their negotiations, not just about wage, but about this AI, issue, and about how it's going to impact their, their work. And so there's a model, right? Even though the video game industry does not have that long history of unionism and that long history of, organizing, they can look there, right? They can see, things, and so they can see what worked, they can see what didn't, they can see draft language, they can see what resonated in messaging, that kind of stuff. But the big thing that they they need to figure out, they need to do to really address this, is to start organizing, right? Because if they don't start organizing, everything you're talking about is going to happen. And it's not just the voice actors. I was listening to I was driving home one day from work a while back and heard an NPR story about this, and it was like a gymnast. He was basically like a Cirque du Soleil type person, but he did 3D modeled stuff for like the Spider-Man games. So when in the game, when you see Spider-Man jumping off a wall and flipping and doing all of that stuff, yes, it's computer generated, but it was modeled off of his body. They put him in front of a green screen surrounded by dozens, if not hundreds, of cameras. They put little dots all over him so that they could map all these different joints, and they had him do the things that Spider-Man does in the game, and that's how they make the game. And presently, he did that thing, right? He did that, and it was only for that game. But his big concern is, now that they have the digital image of me doing that flip, what's if they push this AI stuff, they're just gonna pay me once and use my abilities across the spectrum of their games. They're gonna sell it as an asset. Someone like Epic or Unreal, who runs the engines that's behind these games, have massive asset libraries. And he said, I'm just gonna become a one-off asset, and then my career's over. Until someone comes up with something that no one's had me do, and then they'll pay me to do it one time, and they'll put me in the asset libraries. And so, yeah, AI is a big threat because of who's in control. The U.S. is woefully behind on regulations. Even the EU is behind on regulations, but at least they're doing something. Right, there's a model. And so I think when it comes to AI, that's a big area, and Green should be a lead on this, right? The Democrats are going to be on the side of the technocrats as well. So this is somewhere that the Greens can take a lead. The labor industry needs to evolve. These like the video game industry is, like I said, it's unorganized, right? Our dinosaur archaic labor sector hasn't moved in there. The tech in general, right? And that's a big area of threat. And one thing I'll say, about watching the rollout of AI is the first people in the chopping block are going to be our artists, right? That's what. If I want and voices too, right? I can type in. I have a friend that dabbles in this, and he's a filmmaker, and like he's used a program where he just types in, I want a country song in this style about this topic, and you could hear it on the radio, right? It sounds, and there's no instrument was played, no human was involved in the creation. It's completely artificial and digital. But I think if we aren't now, we're going to be hearing, musicians and voiceovers and things like that happening in AI, and we just won't even be told. So yeah, we've got to make sure that we're really leading on, that. But the artists are going to come first, right? I do a lot of graphic design stuff, and I can go into DALL-E, which is ChatGPT's visual editor, and ask it to make me a flyer. It's terrible. Right? Even when I say I want it to say Green Party meeting, it treats Green Party meeting as art. And so you start getting weird things going on with letters and spelling, and that kind of graphic design is not a threat yet. It will be, but it's not. But if you want me to make you a picture of a wizard fighting a dragon, you're done, right? AI can do that all day, every day. And it can reproduce in seconds what is dozens of hours of work, right, for an artist. So it's really, really worrying, right? Art is a major piece of culture, right? And when we start undermining it, I don't know, things get ugly. I don't know exactly how how to describe it, but when the first thing we're losing is art before a big collapse, it's going to be hard. Art's a big piece of cultural resistance and all that kind of stuff. And we're already living in a kind of a media landscape where there's so much noise that it's hard to get recognized anyway. So once, are we going to have real musicians out anymore? Are we going to have real authors? How are they going to get through the noise when a publishing company can just say, write me a book about this, write me a book about that, right? But it's going to be those frontline artists are the ones that I'm seeing, real risk for as I, use AI, and I work with people who use AI. When I say use, I mean play around with. What is this thing? But I do know people who use it pretty heavily. And yeah, it's those artists. Meanwhile, right, Microsoft hasn't put anything useful in Outlook that helps me, sort the hundreds of emails that I'm going to have when I go into work on Monday. So the who controls this stuff is we got to keep that in mind. But yeah, the U.S., like everything else, we just deploy and we'll see what happens. And in this case, instead of it turns out that gives us cancer, which how many times have we deployed things into the food service like that? Now it's just going to take jobs. They're going to be gone, and it's going to be hard, to do anything after the fact with that. So, but yeah, I just wanted to jump in since I know that's a little outside of Howie's sphere, and Garrett and I with the Green Socialist Organizing Project have at this point it's like 30 something pages white paper on it. And we kind of stopped when we were told we needed to cut it down to 5 pages, and we just gave up. But it exists there in the world as we've been thinking about it. So I'll hand it back to Howie, and we're over time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for help on the artificial intelligence question. I'm just getting my head wrapped around that. So I've been on here 2 weeks, just doing the question and answer. I've got a number of people that would like to come on the podcast. I may get an Amazon worker to talk about the recent strikes, or at least alleged strikes. There's a Polish leftist that I met while I was on my trip, a young woman that will make a very interesting guest that I can get on. There's a British socialist and Ukrainian solidarity activist that has asked to come on. And I'm also thinking I should get somebody back on from Georgia, maybe George Scrivener again, just to give us an update on that struggle, which has become a mass struggle against the government. And then the couple of eco-socialists from Ukraine want to come on. Oh, they haven't given me a date, so I will get back to them. So I would say expect a guest next week, and if not, I'll be here and we'll talk about current events anyway. So everybody have a good week. Happy New Year, and let's build a mass party of the left, because that's what we need to really solve our problems. The Democrats and Republicans are just making them worse.